What if stubborn belly fat had nothing to do with how much you eat, but instead with a single quiet moment in the evening, a moment most people never consciously notice? For decades, fat loss has been sold as a simple equation: eat less, move more. But if that formula truly worked, far more people would be lean today. The truth is more uncomfortable. The human body does not operate like a calculator. It follows time, rhythm, and biological signals that modern life almost completely ignores. And this is exactly where this story begins. What happens to your belly fat when you stop eating around 6 p.m.? Why is the fat surrounding the internal organs so fiercely protected at night? What actually happens to insulin, hormones, and deep visceral fat when food continues to arrive late in the evening? And why can the timing of dinner alone be enough to switch the body from fat storage to fat burning, without more discipline, without harder training, without added stress? If you have ever felt like you were doing everything right and still saw no visible change, that is not a failure of willpower. It is a biological signal that gets overlooked night after night. Stay until the end, because the most important moment for fat loss does not happen in the gym. It begins when the lights go out, the noise of the day fades, and the body finally becomes still.
The biggest misconception about fat loss is not what happens during the day. Most people eat more consciously during the day, move more, train regularly, and pay attention to calories. And in fact, fat loss rarely fails in the morning or at midday. It fails quietly, almost invisibly, when the day comes to an end. Because the human body does not evaluate fat loss meal by meal, nor workout by workout. It evaluates it by biological rhythm, by whether there is a sufficiently long time window to switch from energy intake to repair. At night, there exists a narrow but decisive metabolic window. Within this window, the body decides what happens next. Will energy be burned or protected? Will fat be released or conserved? When this window opens, the body shifts into a maintenance mode. Insulin levels drop, repair mechanisms are activated, and stored energy, especially deep visceral fat, becomes accessible. But if this window never opens, the opposite happens. And the most common reason is surprisingly simple: eating late in the evening. As soon as food continues to arrive in the evening, even in small amounts, even in the form of so-called healthy snacks, the body receives a clear biological message. Energy intake has not ended. Insulin remains active, and as long as insulin is active, fat burning does not begin. Not because the body is stubborn or working against you, but because biology is not capable of multitasking. The body does not burn stored fuel while it is still busy processing new energy. What makes this dynamic so deceptive is its silence. There is no warning signal, no pain, no immediate change. You fall asleep, wake up, and everything feels normal. But behind the scenes, an opportunity is missed night after night. The transition into repair mode never happens. And in exactly this state, belly fat, especially fat deep in the abdominal cavity, is protected like a strategic reserve. That is why so many people experience the same contradiction. They do everything right during the day, yet their waistline barely changes. The problem is not breakfast, not lunch, and not training. It lies in the moment when the body should actually be coming to rest and instead remains trapped in intake mode. Fat loss is not sabotaged by what you do during the day, but by what does not end in the evening. Once this connection is understood, the entire perspective on fat loss changes fundamentally. It is no longer about struggle or discipline, but about rhythm. And this rhythm begins quietly, exactly when the day ends. At the center of this nightly decision-making process stands a single hormone that is often misunderstood, yet plays a key role: insulin.
Insulin is often portrayed as the enemy, but biologically, insulin is neither good nor bad. It is a precise signaling hormone with a clear task: to safely transport energy from food into the cells. Every time you eat, insulin steps onto the stage and does exactly that job. As long as this job is not finished, the biological message is clear: external energy is available. There is no need to access internal reserves. Here, a simple but unforgiving rule of physiology applies. Fat burning and active insulin signaling exclude each other. Not for moral reasons, not due to lack of discipline, but because the body cannot process new energy and release old energy at the same time. When insulin remains active, stored fat remains locked away, especially the fat located deep in the abdominal cavity that surrounds vital organs. The problem does not begin with large meals. It begins with the extended evening. A late yogurt, a handful of nuts, a small snack considered healthy, All of these demand insulin once again. With each of these small interruptions, the work shift of this hormone is extended, and if this shift lasts too long, the body never gets the chance to flip the switch. The transition from energy intake to nighttime maintenance never occurs. What makes this process so difficult to recognize is its invisibility. There is no signal that warns you, no sense of malfunction. Metabolism feels calm, stable, unchanged. Yet biologically, the body remains trapped in a state of continuous intake. Instead of switching into night mode, it stays in an extended daytime operation. Yet evolutionarily, night is designed for something entirely different. It is not a passive state. It is an active phase of repair, regeneration, and use of stored energy. When eating ends early enough, insulin is allowed to complete its task and withdraw. This withdrawal is not force or deprivation. It is a natural signal. The external energy flow has paused. Only then can the body switch. In this state, the body does not feel threatened. It does not sense scarcity. On the contrary, it recognizes safety, and it is precisely this safety that allows it to tap into stored energy. Fat, especially visceral fat, becomes a logical and available energy source, not because less was eaten, but because the timing is right. The crucial idea is this: fat loss does not arise from constant insulin activation throughout the entire day, but from the correct moment when insulin steps aside. Ending dinner earlier does not mean skipping a meal. It means giving the body the quiet time window it needs to switch into the mode it is biologically designed for. And from exactly this quiet time window, a second, even deeper nightly cascade begins, one that is not controlled by food, but by light and darkness, by an internal clock but humans have carried for thousands of years. As insulin leaves the stage, another hormone enters the nighttime space, quietly but decisively: melatonin.
Melatonin is usually viewed only as a sleep hormone, but metabolically, it is far more than that. Melatonin is the signal that tells the entire body that the day is over. It marks the transition from activity to preservation, from intake to repair. As melatonin rises, the nervous system slows down, body temperature drops slightly, and regenerative processes are prepared. From an evolutionary perspective, this sequence is clearly programmed. For most of human history, food intake occurred during daylight. Night was reserved for withdrawal, rest, protection, restoration. Accordingly, metabolism adapted to this pattern. When melatonin rises, insulin sensitivity naturally decreases. The body signals that it no longer expects new energy. It wants to finish, not to absorb. The modern problem arises when melatonin and insulin are active at the same time. This combination was hardly ever intended in human evolution. When food continues to arrive in the evening, insulin is forced to work against the natural biological rhythm. Glucose is removed from the blood more slowly. Sugar remains in circulation longer. A subtle, low-grade inflammation develops, not strong enough to be immediately felt, but sufficient to change how energy is stored. In this state, excess energy is preferentially deposited where it appears safest, deep in the abdominal cavity, surrounding vital organs, visceral fat. This fat is metabolically active, but also strategically protected, and that is precisely why it becomes increasingly resistant to breakdown with chronic late eating. What makes this conflict so insidious is its invisibility. There is no pain, no clear discomfort, no obvious moment of failure. The body appears calm, but biologically it is working against its internal clock. When this discrepancy repeats night after night, metabolism learns to preserve belly fat as a long-term reserve. When eating ends earlier, however, the hormonal landscape of the night changes fundamentally. Insulin has sufficient time to complete its work. Before melatonin rises, blood sugar is already stabilized. The signals no longer overlap. They do not compete. The body receives a clear, unified message. It is time to rest. In this synchronized state, metabolism runs more quietly, inflammatory processes are dampened, and stored energy can be released in an orderly manner. The difference lies not in the amount of food, but in the harmony of hormones. When melatonin can exert its effects in a low-insulin environment, the night no longer works against fat loss, but quietly in its favor. And exactly at this moment, when insulin and melatonin are no longer working against each other, a biological time window opens that very few people ever fully reach, a window in which the body enters a state of deep metabolic calm, not stagnation, but focused efficiency. It is the beginning of nighttime fat burning.
Once this state is reached, the body's list of priorities changes. The liver, which functions as an energy distribution center during the day, switches into a nighttime mode. It begins to systematically release its stored reserves. not chaotically, not maximally, but in a controlled manner. Glycogen is slowly broken down, blood sugar remains stable, and the brain continues to be supplied. But this process has a clear limit. Once the easily accessible stores are depleted, metabolism shifts one level deeper. The body looks for an energy source that is reliable, abundant, and usable over the long term. This is where visceral fat comes into focus. In the late-night hours, a quiet transition begins. The liver increases the production of ketone bodies, an alternative fuel derived from fatty acids. This transition does not happen abruptly. It is the result of a clean hormonal sequence: low insulin, high melatonin, a calm nervous system. In this combination, fat is no longer viewed as a reserve, but as a primary energy source. Visceral fat responds particularly sensitive to these signals. It is highly perfused, hormonally active, and easily accessible to the body when conditions are right. At night, when no new energy arrives from outside, this fat is preferentially mobilized. Not the subcutaneous fat on hips or thighs, but the fat deep in the abdominal cavity that places the greatest burden on metabolism. This process can be compared to a city at night. During the day, there is traffic, noise, constant movement. Energy is distributed, consumed, rerouted. At night, however, shops close, streets empty, maintenance work begins. Systems are checked, repaired, optimized. This is exactly how the body operates when eating annings at the right time. If this nightly order is disrupted by late meals, snacks, or caloric drinks, the city remains in continuous operation. Lights do not go out, machines keep running, repair is postponed, and fat that could be broken down remains untouched. What many underestimates is that this mechanism does not act short-term, it is cumulative. Every night the body can transition into this mode uninterrupted, strengthens metabolic flexibility. Every night with late eating weakens it slightly. Belly fat, in this sense, is not a sign of weak willpower, but the result of a chronically disrupted schedule. So when you stop eating at 6 p.m., you are not forcing deprivation, you are simply removing an obstacle. You give the body the chance to do what it is biologically programmed to do, no more, but also no less. And that is precisely why many people report not only a flatter abdomen, but deeper sleep, clearer thinking in the morning, and more stable energy throughout the day. It is not an isolated effect, it is a system returning to rhythm. But here lies the crucial point that almost no one explains. This benefit does not appear immediately. The body tests, it observes, it waits to see whether this pattern will persist. Only when regularity sets in does it begin to stop defending belly fat as an emergency reserve. And then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silhouette changes.
The clock on the wall does not determine how late it is for your metabolism. What matters is light. As soon as the sun sinks lower, the body begins preparing for night, regardless of what the calendar or your schedule says. The brain registers changes in light frequency long before it is truly dark outside. And at exactly this moment, hormonal priorities begin to shift. Cortisol, the activity hormone of the day, follows a clear rhythm. It rises in the morning, keeps us alert, focused, and capable. In the late afternoon, it naturally begins to fall. This decline is not a sign of weakness, but a necessary transition. The body releases work mode and prepares recovery mode. In parallel, the liver responds. It has its own internal clock, independent of the brain. This liver clock is driven not only by light, but strongly by eating times. When food is absent in the early evening, the liver interprets this as a clear signal. The day is over. Energy intake ends. Activate night program. This is where 6 p.m. becomes biologically relevant. In most geographical latitudes, this time falls within a window where light intensity, cortisol decline, and liver rhythm align for the first time. Eating after this point artificially pushes the liver clock backward, not by minutes, but by hours. Metabolism believes it is still daytime, even though the brain is already switching to night. This internal time conflict is the core of the problem. The brain sends rest, the liver receives activity, hormones contradict each other, processes overlap, and in this state, no clear breakdown can occur. Fat remains secured. Many people argue, but I don't go to bed until 11 p.m. Biologically, this is irrelevant. Metabolism begins its nighttime cycle long before sleep. Those who eat late force the body to interrupt this preparation repeatedly, night after night. Studies show that identical calorie amounts consumed in the evening are more likely to be stored as visceral fat than in the morning, not because of the calories themselves, but because of timing. The body treats energy differently depending on when it arrives. In the evening, it is conserved. In the morning, it is used. This does not mean that 6 p.m. is a magical boundary. It is a biological guideline, a time anchor that aligns with our internal clocks. For some people, it may be 5:30 p.m., for others 6:30 p.m., but beyond 7 p.m., metabolism increasingly works against the night. And that is exactly why so many people fail despite a calorie deficit. They eat less but at the wrong time. The body feels unsafe. It stores, especially where safety is the highest priority, the abdominal cavity. When eating ends early, predictability emerges. Metabolism learns that the night is reliably free of intake. This safety is the prerequisite for belly fat to no longer be defended. Because fat is not punishment, it is insurance. And insurance is only canceled when risk permanently declines.
Yet as clear as this mechanism is, it does not apply equally to everyone. Human metabolism is adaptable, but not limitless. People with severe underweight, a history of eating disorders, hormonal conditions, or very high physical demands in the evening require individualized adjustments. Pregnant individuals or those with specific metabolic disorders should also not adopt time windows blindly, but under medical supervision. The key point is this: stopping eating early is not a dogma, it is a tool. And like any tool, it only works when it fits the situation. For most healthy adults, however, the body shows very quickly whether it accepts this pattern. The first signs are subtle. Sleep becomes deeper, especially in the first half of the night. Nighttime awakenings decrease. Mornings begin clearer, with less craving. Energy becomes more stable throughout the day, without strong afternoon crashes. Interestingly, weight loss is often not the first visible result. Frequently, the sensation in the abdominal area changes first. Less pressure, less tension. Clothes fit differently before the scale reacts. This is because visceral fat responds metabolically first, even if it becomes visible later. Another signal is the disappearance of evening snack cravings after a few days, not through willpower, but through hormonal adjustment. Ghrelin, the hunger hormone, begins to adapt to the new rhythm. The body learns that eating ends at a reliable time and stops sounding the alarm. What matters is not perfection, but consistency. A single late meal does not destroy progress, but a chronically delayed dinner prevents adaptation. Metabolism does not respond to exceptions, but to patterns. So when you stop eating at 6 p.m., you are not forcing fat loss. You are creating conditions. You remove disruptive signals. You allow the body space to apply its own logic again, and that is exactly where the power of this approach lies. Belly fat does not disappear because it is fought. It disappears when the body no longer sees a reason to keep it. Not through discipline, but through timing.